Okay, we're going to read our social studies, page 160 to 163. I would like you to have your book out and following along with me. Okay, so here we have our timeline, okay? It looks like this part of what we're going to read is from about 1807 to 1869. Okay, so about 200 years ago, is kind of the middle of what we're talking about here, okay? So we were talking about how did people get from one place to another. They didn't have cars. They didn't have airplanes. They didn't have phones, okay? So how did they communicate? How did they get from one place to the other? And then also, how did they communicate with one another and receive their information? Okay, our vocabulary words are transportation, which is the way that people get from one place to another. A steam engine is a kind of like a train, okay? A steam engine is a train that turns steam into power, but they also had steamboats, so they used the same kind of engine that would take steam and turn it into power, and they could power the boat rather than before that it would be more like almost like a canoe that they had. They could be bigger boats, but they didn't necessarily have engines on them. They used sails, or they used oars to kind of to push along the side. A railroad, you know what that is a railroad, right? A train. And a telegraph was a machine that they used to communicate with one another. It was almost like a typewriter, but it could go over wires, so they could send it from one location to the other, and they could send messages by typing in a code. Okay, so let's build on what we know. A car can travel over 60 miles an hour. Long ago, there were no cars and very few roads. People on foot might need a whole day just to travel 15 miles. Okay, so nice big heading here for us, transportation in the 1800s. In the 1800s, thousands of people moving west hoped to make new lives in California and Oregon. So if we were looking at a map here, okay, you had people that were living over here on the East Coast. We learned that they went to St. Louis, okay, over here in the middle. Right here, there's St. Louis right there, okay? And here's your rivers that are coming down, right? So a lot of people lived in St. Louis, but then they wanted to keep on coming out west to California, okay? These settlers used many kinds of transportation on their trips. Transportation is the way people and things are carried from one place to another. In the early 1800s, people usually arrived in St. Louis by horse or boat. From there, they could follow rough trails across the country. Some walked, others drove large wagons covered in a heavy cloth, like these down here, right? We know those. Like Little House in the Big Woods, right? And the settlers made difficult journeys across rivers, mountains, and plains, okay? And we have a nice picture here, and the caption is wagons and trains carried people west in the 1860s. So here you have a train, and then you have wagons with the horses, and then the people, literally everything they owned and their kids would be in the back of those little carriages there. Do my best to hold this steady for you here. All right, so here we have a steam engine railroad car, okay, a train. So burning fuel makes the heat, okay, so here they have the fuel, burning. And then the heat turns into steam as it goes through here, and the steam comes up, and then the steam actually forces the wheels to turn in there, okay, so that's how it works. All right, steamboats and railroads. So we're going to learn about the different kinds of steamboats. Think of that as like a big boat on a river, and railroads as trains, okay? Over time, moving west became easier. We're going to read this together. The steam engine made transportation faster. A steam engine is a machine that turns steam into power. Robert Fulton built the first useful steamboat in 1807. It used a steam engine for power. Steamboats traveled on rivers and oceans. Travelers to the west could take steamboats to St. Louis. They might travel by wagon for the rest of their journey. Railroads also changed how people traveled. A railroad is a track with two steel rails on which trains move. You guys all know that. By the 1830s, railroads had been built in the East, and within a few years, steam engines powered the trains. Okay, so now we've talked about how they were transported or moved from one place to another. Let's talk about how they communicated. How did they get their information? How did they talk to one another? So, communication in the 1800s. Another invention, the telegraph, let people get information more quickly. A telegraph is a machine that sends signals by electricity. The signals speed along a wire stretched between telegraph stations. Samuel Morse helped invent the telegraph. In 1844, telegraph lines could send messages between cities in minutes. Trains and telegraphs made life easier in the East. However, transportation and communication were slower in the West. So way out here, while they were improving things, communication-wise along the East Coast, okay, because remember there's a lot more people living here where your colonies are and your first settlers, and even coming out here to St. Louis, this whole area, there's a lot of people, but slowly people were moving a little bit further west out to California, but there weren't as many people. So these people out of here in Oregon and California and Nevada and Arizona were really separated from the other people way over here in the East, and they really didn't have a lot of ways of finding out things that were going on, 3,000 miles away, okay? There was no email and no text messages, okay? So the telegraph was kind of the first text messaging machine, okay, for, 200 years ago. So 180, actually, 175. So what it would do was if they wanted to say hi, they would go ... So then the person on the other end would hear beep, 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 beep. And they would write down, okay, beep, 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 that's an H. Beep, beep, that's an I. Okay, so they would do it beep, 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 beep. Okay, for the longer one. So they were just beeps that would come across, and someone would have to sit at the other end and listen to the recording of different beeps and write down what letters it was. And then when there was a pause, they knew it was a new word or a new letter. Okay? Let's see. So communication is the way that people pass information from each other. People depended on ships and stagecoaches for news. Then came the Pony Express. The Pony Express was super fun. This group of young horseback riders carried the mail. They could gallop from Missouri to California in about 10 days. So that's from about St. Louis, so about the middle of the country, all the way to California, about 10 days. So they would literally be on a horse with a bag of mail, kind of attached either to their back, like a backpack, or they could hang it off the side of the horse. And just by themselves, they would just be riding a horse across. And that was the first post office. And they would deliver the mail, but it would take about 10 days to get it there. Okay. Linking east and west. As fast as they went, the riders could not keep up with the telegraph. After the first telegraph line crossed the country in 1861, the Pony Express ended. There just wasn't a need for them anymore because people were like, why am I going to write a letter and have it take 10 days to get there when I can, go to this basically like a little store, tell them the message I want to send, and very quickly that message could be to California to another store where that person could go in and get it, okay? Then in 1869, a railroad linked the West and the East Coast for the first time. You ready? The telegraph and the railroad united the country. In the mid-1800s, the railroad, the steamboat, and the telegraph changed travel and communication in the United States. They made it possible for the Americans to cross the country and send news more quickly than ever before.